Okay, so our learning objectives here is to identify the physical factors of the real estate analysis, to identify the environmental factors of the real estate analysis, to explain the environmental impact of the real estate development. Okay, so if we talk about the physical conditions, it talks about the soil, the locations, and also other structures or developments in the land are also considered to appraise the value, because the phrase location is used over and over again in order to discuss to the real estate markets. If we talk about real estate markets, those are the potential people who used to buy the properties, because location is very important for them, for the markets, in order to know the accessibility and the things that they, which why they want uh, to buy that land. Because one of the physical conditions that we consider to buy a property is the accessibility of location and access to the following: education, work, social gatherings, etc. So please take note that these physical conditions are continuous to be irrelevant, okay, irrelevant in all at all times, because location as a physical condition, it also gives or it brings value to the price or to the piece of real estate. So it means that the physical conditions, one of the factors or the major factor of appraising the value is the location itself. Because for every location, there is a zonal value or zonal value aside from the fair market value to be assessed by the government. And this will be also the basis of how the price will be created. And even the value of the property is created. Because if you talk about the value, this is the high price or the the price ceiling of a property which can assign to sell to our real estate market. Please take note that the value is not only a function of the demand or the market demand, but is also value is also a particular structure on a place. If we talk about location, because there are some appraisers believe that the more the example of this, the more the location is more provincial, it's the value is more not really cheap, it's very affordable or low. But if the location is a chartered city or urbanized, then the value of the physical conditions of the land or the property, it might be expensive. Because if we include the structures, it also includes the material cost of the development of the properties. That's why location itself is what makes the real estate assets are really unique, because please take note that the land increases the value, but the structures or buildings decreasing the value because of depreciation. That's why developers rent it, and they used to rent it and renovate it to increase the value. Okay, so what are the physical factors or the physical conditions or the physical factors of the real estate that we used to consider in the appraisal? First is the location. So it's part of the introduction, because it can also define the boundaries of the properties and consider also the nearby areas or the neighboring properties as well. There are some questions about the location and to consider this as physical factor. How does this location fit with the surrounding properties? Yes, this is surrounding the other properties which are nearby or surround within the area or the site. And another question is the property being used in a way that makes financial sense, giving the surrounding property types and property mix? Yes, location is also makes the financial sense. As I've said earlier, if the location is more provincial or rural, the value of the property is it can be low, because there are some properties are not utilized property or unutilized, okay, in a sense. But if the location is more on urbanized and there are a lot of people, there is a business or central business, it makes the property can be, the value of the properties might be approaching on, it might be expensive. And another question for the location, did the neighboring properties add value to the location or not? Yes, because when we talk about neighboring properties, it can also add value, especially if the neighborhood or the nearby places of the property has a lot of access. Example, if it is a residential, does the residential property has an access to school, nearby the school or the church or the mall. So even the neighbor, if that location is nearby those places, then it also considered it as one of the factors for the appraisal or appraising the value of the properties. Another is the natural geographic boundaries. So this is the physical conditions of the properties which we consider the geographic boundaries of the properties. And what are those geographic boundaries? It talks about the rivers, the lakes, and oceans. Of course, there are some properties or the land which also have this kind of geographic boundaries, because these natural boundaries that we mentioned, the rivers, lakes, and oceans, it also limits the availability of land for the development. But it can add value to the neighboring properties if it is utilized appropriately. Example of that is in Boracay. Okay, in Boracay, there are some land or raw land which there's also a boundary from the rivers, lakes, or oceans, because of course in Boracay the lands are limited to use for residential, for commercial, and also they preserve some of the environment. That's why the illegal developers for the land with no papers and there's no permit for the DENR, then it will be forfeited, or it will be file a charges against them for damaging such environment. That's why we consider this as part of the value. It can add value to the property's physical condition for the neighboring properties, especially if the lands are used properly. Example, in Boracay, Naklan, because it's a tourist spot, that's why there are a lot of transient house that can be used as commercialized land for the tourists that can earn money. Okay, and it can be used as a lease or a rent. Another is topography. The topography is the study of the surface of the land, and it is the study of the land and its surface rather. So this is also a physical condition or a physical factor to be considered in the value of the property, because this is the crucial factor to analyze our market, because the surface of the land or the topography also influence the hazards or calamity issues that affects the surface of the land. Example, if you develop a property, or if you sell a property or develop a property in the area which is very vulnerable, well, of course, perhaps the value of this property may not be less expensive. Okay, because that's why we study also before we develop a property or we sell a land or a property. If it is available for development, we must consider the surface of the land. If the land are used for residential, commercial use, or agricultural use. Because there are some lands or there are some properties which are not subject to any developments, but to preserve as an environment, habitat of the living. Soil conditions is also part of topography, because since we talk about the surface of the land, because the soil is also analyzed, the information, if this soil is fertile and productive for the development of a property. Because the soil conditions are also important in planning, okay, for the consumption of land planning that involves also a vegetation or growing crops. So it means if the land is used for agricultural purposes, then we can establish a farm there that makes it productive. But if the soil condition is not intended for agricultural, but intended for residential or commercial, then why not? Okay, then especially for the place that we need for to be urbanized. That's why the soil type, the ideal soil types or the types of soil also provide adequate drainage and be able to support the structure of the properties or the land without slippage or any cracks in the foundation of those properties which established in that land. As I've said, there are some soil conditions which are not intended for development, but more on agricultural or preservation of the environment. Climate is also part as a physical condition because it is also very important to analyze to conduct a market analysis on the climate. Because if the land is very vulnerable on the climate as one of the damages, then it might be difficult for the property to sell, especially if we appraise the value, it might become not expensive or it can decrease the value of those land. Example of that, 2 weeks ago, a typhoon marine affect the areas of northern Luzon. And as you can see that some areas of Luzon are devastated, particularly La Union, La Trinidad, that which the root crops or the agriculture are damaged. Okay, and especially in La Union because of the flash floods. And of course, if you are investing a property or if you're selling a property nearby La Union and you see the climate, although the climate is unpredictable, but when it comes to because of the global climate change, and it damaged the properties, then it will be difficult to appraise the value on it. Yes, you can appraise the value, but value of that, but when it comes to the contract price or selling price, it might be approaching, and you will also check if this type of real estate can be sold out or it can be marketed to the prospect customers, okay, or the prospect, the clients. That's why climate may be directly, because climate also affects the income of a lot of properties and a lot of things like the resort and entertainment facilities. Climate is also important to understand the demand of the real estate and economic drivers of an area, because it is one also to consider that if this area is not prone to any calamity, or if there's a calamity, it will not be easily damaged, but there is also a thing that must protect the lives of those people or client there. That's why please take note of the climate, that locations with the warmer weather and mild winter, it tends to attract people and business. Well, in the Philippines, we are tropical weather, warm and cold winter. It also attracts, but will depending on the calamity. And population and economic growth is tend to be higher in the areas of those warmer and winter climate. Natural resources also is a physical conditions of the value of the real estate, because city locations are also important with natural resources, because these natural resources is also a major economic drivers of the country, especially in the industry and also employment opportunities. These natural resources are also served as an economic factor for transportation, mining, and also tourism. Water availability is also important for the real estate because of the factories or the commercialized business. We need water for the farmlands, for the agricultural areas, and residential areas, because water is life. Water is everyday consumption of the people for whatever their purpose. Because a city without a city or a place without adequate water resources, it can make hard or poor economic growth prospects. And it will also influence the overall real estate market to forecast for allocation. And then transportation patterns is also a physical condition, as I've said earlier, accessibility. Because current transportation patterns and proposed changes on those patterns are the critical components of market analysis or analyzing the markets. When we set the value on the properties, and traffic patterns also determine the travel paths of the population in the areas who receives a highest concentration of potential client activity. You know what? If there are a lot of traffic, it's because of the city or the urban areas, it can be, you know, it can also affect the value of the properties or real estate. But if some transportation patterns are accessible based on the location, then it will be also a good thing for that value. And traffic patterns are especially important for those tenants whose business requires an amount of foot traffic and visibility, especially the cities in Makati and global city or global center. And a location along a major roadway represent a much higher demand than the neighboring population would otherwise suggest. So those are the physical factors also that affects the physical conditions of the real estate. So we have the location, we have the location, we have the soil condition, the topography, we have also the topography, we have also the transportation patterns, the climate, of course. So those are the physical conditions. And now let's proceed to the environmental factors. Okay, so what are those environmental factors that also affects the physical conditions of the real estate? Because these environmental factors, it refers to the interaction between the people and the place, or shall we say the urban development, or which the location has been urbanized or becomes civilized with the natural environment. Because you know what, this is the greatest thing that we have to consider in the real estate. Aside from the developments, improvements, we should also sustain our environment or our natural environment, because during the industrial age, the period of machineries, technology, people forgot to consider that we need also the natural resources, because this is the source of all developments and all technologies. Because if we use this kind of environment or natural resources, we have to replace it. If we apply economics in the subject matter, that's why people are the resources are become scarce, because there are a lot of people have consumed a lot, but they did not replace the things that they consume, which is the major resources is our environment. Okay, that's why in every phase of a real estate development impacts the environment in some way, because development changes the natural interaction among the land, water, and animals. Yes, an example of that, let's say if the land is a jungle or a forest, then because someone who wants to develop a commercialized there, so you might distract the habitat of the animals. That's why you heard in the news that there are a lot of wild animals are in the city because they are distracted. Yes, that's the interaction. That's the reality. Because because there is an interaction, and why there are some animals become wilder or worse, because it not consider their habitats. And don't you know, there are some also the lands or properties or a raw land which is not subject for development, but we have to preserve for the habitat of the animals and other species. That's why nowadays, because we are in the millennial age, because our planet Earth is so much old, that's why the United Nations, an international policy on environmental sustainability, which every country must participate, that for every development, we must sustain, retain, and replace all the resources that we use and to save the Mother Earth. Because nowadays, there are a lot of pollutions, And because technology, our food that we eat is on a hurry, but if we ask for a nutrition, what happened? And people are died at the younger age because the old people who born in the 50s, 60s, because the people who used to eat organic foods or organic material, that's why they have a long life, the senior years. Okay, but anyway, of course, we should also consider in the value of the real estate is the air and water quality. Because if we develop a real estate, we consider this environmental factor that we used to have a clean water. Okay? And also a free from pollution. We all know in the cities, in the urban areas, because it's a lot of vehicles, it's air pollution. And because of the improper waste disposal of the industrial companies, the water is polluted. They dispose their waste on the water. Okay, we all know that. But right now, we have to retain these things and other alternatives in order to have a water quality to supply water to all the real estate. And this is also part of physical conditions because if the property is has no or has a poor water quality, it might be difficult for you to appraise the value and also to put a contract price or a selling price. And the third one, if we can sell it or the someone can buy the property. Okay, that's why there is a long-term sustainability on this air and water. That's why right now in the government, they used to promote the urbanized public vehicles with less oil or less hybrid machineries or hybrid material that can save the air or they will not pollute the air. For the water, we have the proper distillation or filtration in order to the wasted water can be more utilized because it will be filtered and distilled in the first place. So take note that cities with a lot of pollutions, okay, it might affect the valuation of the properties. But areas with a clean air and water, this is highly desirable, just like the rural areas or a rural area with the development, but not more. Of course, there's a progress. Okay, it's very desirable to people. That's why there is an average growth on the population on those areas with the clean area or the clean properties. And it also affects the value in the future. That's why local governments may require a lot of procedures for a large real estate development that could negatively impact the natural environment. You know what? If you are in the real estate company and if you develop a particular land, the real estate company has a lot of permits to get for the land, for the development of land. What are those? HLURB, DNR, what else? The economic zone, the local government, assessor's office, and even the PEZA or the Philippine Economic Zone Authority because of the zonal value of the location. Okay, that's why the governments are now restrict for the real estate companies that before they used to develop a particular land and ready to sell, then there are a lot of things that the companies must do. If they don't apply those papers or permits, then this development will not pursue. Okay. Okay. Another also environmental factor is the soil conditions. The soil conditions also is a present and a particular property that has a high varying degree impact on the value sustainable environment. Because the soil has the value classifying the soil is important for the huge implications to the cost and feasibility of the future use and development. Because if the soil does not allow an adequate drainage, there will be additional measures may need to be implemented properly to run off the erosion due to the rainfall. So there are some, we classify or we analyze the soil, the land or the soil in the land that used to develop, because we also, as I've said earlier, topography, the land surface, we also consider the drainage or the condition of the soil if this can be not be erode for a long period of time. Well, of course, if the foundation of the properties or the structure is very weak, then it will lead to a danger like a landslides, liquefactions, sinkholes, and that's beyond the control. That's why we have to study the soil, the conditions. Okay, and the soil classification also determine, if we can classify the soil, determine if the land has the ability to hold a large weight of structure without cracking, without damage. Because there are some soil which is not intended for the development. Because there are soil which is we need to preserve as for agricultural purposes or preservation of the environment and natural resources. Another is wildlife. So wildlife is also a real estate development impacts, because this impact of wildlife is a small related cutting down the trees which birds and insects live. Yes, because if you talk about habitat, sometimes you have to consider wildlife. So there are some type of endangered protected plants and animals that we have to protect, but in the real estate development, it may impact some of those things. I'm not saying that the real estate companies must take for granted of this. No. What I'm trying to say is the real estate companies, before they given a permission to develop a particular property, it should be assessed by the DENR, because they are the responsible government agency for the environmental measures towards the wildlife. Okay, so if the land is not yet subject for any development, then the DNR may not approve that, or they may restrain for the permit to conduct a particular developments on that land. Okay, because as I've said, there are some properties or land which is it should be preserved, the environment. Okay, wetlands. Okay, when it talks about the wetlands, this is the water, the soil that is covered by water. So those are the wetlands. Wetlands are located throughout the country, and it is important to the local ecology because it also improves the water quality and even the flood waters. That also maintains the surface of the water flow. As far as I know, the wetlands are, of course, the rivers, the lakes, and the oceans. Of course, we consider these environmental factors of the properties because we have certain boundaries on the surface of those things, which it will lead to danger. Example of the wetland, the lake in Taal, in Tagaytay, in Batangas, or Talisay. Because of the alert level, some part of the properties there's a danger zone of wetlands, lake. Because anytime the Taal can explode, that's why all the residents who are near that place and in the diameter area, they have to be evacuated. Okay, because it is also a things that it will not be considered or not might damage the life of everyone. And take note that development in wetlands, it may be limited, yes, because of the DNR's regulation. Because there are some wetlands, development may not be feasible with all due the continual presence of water. And real estate projects located in or near the wetlands areas consider the potential cost of preparing land for development along with the purchase of restoration credits. An example of this, another is Boracay. Because Boracay is a tourist spot, it's part of the wetland, the oceans. There are a lot of commercial areas, right? And there are some commercial areas are illegal. That's why Duterte gets mad and upset about those things, and they used to forfeit all the developments there in the first place. And another, because of people are in Tagalog sa Laula, in Filipino language, the Boracay is polluted. That's why, remember, it was last year during the pandemic or 2019 that the Boracay was rehabilitated, and it will not use for a few months to rehabilitate, and then after the rehabilitation to clean the land and let's go back to normal. Oh, that's a part of development. So in order to increase the tourism, because Boracay is one of the tourist spots that generate money to all the real estate developers there for the leasehold. Okay, so that's environmental factors, because if the things are polluted, it also decreases the value of the properties there. And if we talk about water quality, we all know that the water of the Boracay is a blue water, but if it is polluted, it becomes green, because I watched it 2 years ago or last year about that. That's why our president, they used to rehabilitate not only the Boracay, even Metro Manila in the Manila Bay. And that's a good thing, because if we will not consider these things, we used to consume a lot of things, but we did not preserve or sustain the environment, then too much development can be a bad thing. And it will lead to losses. And of course, the environmental impact and sustainability in real estate. So there are some law, a regulation or a policies as a part of the development of the real estate that require an environmental impact studies. Yes, before we develop a particular land. That's why, as I've said earlier, there are some laws or policy or which a permit from the government agencies to study and to conduct an analysis if those lands are intended for residential, residential development, commercial development, agricultural, timberland, or industrial approach. There are a lot of permits. That's why you have to, it requires a lot of studies. It will not be a one click that the other day, this land has a developed structure. The actual regulation and the requirements may be differed by the state, but it may also include anything from the analysis of additional traffic conditions on the roadways to the impact of the native plant and wildlife. Okay. Yes, because there are some regulations that there are some environment that should not be developed, and it will not be affect the damage. Example of that, if I'm not mistaken, it's way back 2019. If you remember in SM Baguio, well, SM Baguio is a mall. It is a property development of SM Corporation, because it's very sad for the people of Baguio City that the pine trees nearby the mall has been cut, and it became a parking lot of the mall if you came to the Baguio. Because my way back 2016, that was my last travel in Baguio, which I see a lot of pine trees. And the pine trees is also preserved because it gives a fresh air, and this is the legacy or the sign of the logo of Baguio City, the city of pines, right? But because of SM, of course, SM violates, for me, violates this kind, although the DENR and the local government of Baguio has a permit and in a legal basis to cut those trees. But for the environmental advocate, it feels sad because the pine trees are endangered species. That's why there are a lot of people who used to rehabilitate pine trees to preserve, okay, in the Philippines, especially in the cold area, in the cold areas. Because if we development is not of course development is good, but it will harm the environment. That might be some things that it might be compromised. And also development has environmental impact, both of the construction and the completed project. And please take note that the environmental impact applies to the existing structures and also proposed new development projects. So what's the environmental impact? Because of those development, some part of the area or the nearby places, it becomes endangered. Example, this is a reality in the in the area of Binyan, Laguna, as an example of what I'm saying environmental impact, because of the development of a particular real estate company, because they used to upgrade the land to be more upper, just in case of the drainage or the flood, it will not easily the water level of flood will not be go up. But because of this development, the nearby places of this subdivision, outside the subdivision, because they used to get their subdivision up or higher, then the lowlands, when there are a low pressure area, because they used to get a higher surface of the land, the lowlands have flooded with above the head of the people. And this this developing company or real estate developer had been filed a case, okay, for this of course it was sued by the resident of the people of outside the subdivision because of what their development. But the saddest thing, that the developer have legal papers and they have the right to do that, and it was approved by a local government to uplift their surface for the drainage and to avoid a flood inside the subdivision. But the affected area are the outside, which became a lowland because of that development. Okay, so there's an environmental impact. And of course, make sure that if there's a development of the real estate, we must also consider environmental sustainability. That's why the DNR is always there. To monitor the places that might affect the environment. So developing a particular real estate is not an easy thing, but take note, from those physical conditions, it might affect the value of the properties or the value of the land.